James Cameron. He was in this area just last week when they had the Senate apology for for lynchings. Now, he is 91 years old, and in 1930, in August, he was involved with two friends of his. They were older. He was 16 years old, and they persuaded him to go along on a robbery. And when they got down on Lover's Lane, they found two people in the car. When he opened the door with a gun, he realized it was a white man who was actually a friend of his, and they had been helping each other, and they had actually grown up together. So he went and gave the gun back to his friends and told them, I can't go through this. And he ran all the way home. He was just so terrified. Well, because they had been seen, they killed the man, and they thought they had killed the woman, but she lived. She was able to identify them. Of course, the story grew, and they said that she was raped and so on and so forth. So a lynch mob came. They lynched one of his friends. They lynched his second friend, and they came back and they got him. They were, of course, they beat him half to death before they even took him out of the jailhouse. And drug him down the street with a rope tightly around his neck, and they actually took him up to the tree where his two friends were hanging, and he was standing underneath their feet, dangling over his head. And he said he was praying. He said, God, you know, I was wrong, but I did not actually go through. And he said he heard a voice say, that young man did not have anything to do with that murder. Let him go. And he said that quiet. All of a sudden, it was, you know, it was a mob of 200 people. It's calling and screaming. I mean, they were bloodthirsty, and all of a sudden, it became quiet. And he said it just seemed like an eternity, but he felt the rope loosen around his neck, and they just let it go, and they just walked away.
Hi, welcome back, and we're here with my fabulous cousin.
Yeah. And we have a picture of the great-great-great-grandfather, Frederick Douglass, the Frederick Douglass.
Frederick Douglass, yeah. And Melanie.
It's painted by my daughter, who was an artist and a poet.
Yeah, and it's funny.
Melanie Douglass.
Yeah, and it's funny because I'm also an artist, and I see this, I'm like, man, I got another art. Yes.
You need to collaborate.
Yeah.
Douglass and Douglass.
There you go. Yeah.
Full of talent resources. Why not?
Yeah, it's like our family has got a lot of artists in public family.
Yeah, well, I mean, art has been part of it. Frederick was actually my great-great-grandfather, played the violin, and then one of his favorite grandchildren was Joseph, who actually became a concert violinist. So they've been artists over the years. So art has always been part of it in music appreciation. I've always been involved in the arts in some way. I myself have been a photographer and a writer, so I'm somewhat involved in the arts. And the reenactments, of course, involve acting and communication. So it's very much a part of this.
All right, we have a clip. Let's take a look.
Then jointly, my wife and I do the reenactments, and the reenactments have a number of purposes. One, to keep alive the legacy of my great-great-grandfather, but also to teach young people their heritage, and then we bring it current. I mean, we try and interpret what are the lessons, you know, from slavery. And the first and foremost lesson is that each and every one of us has within ourselves the infinite capacity to transform ourselves for better, because if we think my ancestors, your ancestors, or those of you whose ancestors came here as indentured servants, when they ended that period of servitude, they had nothing. And they were able to go forward, educate themselves, become the doctors and lawyers, so they transformed themselves. And we try and get young people to understand that they have an obligation to those who went before them and made so many sacrifices to become successful. And they have to have 100% participation in society, have to vote, have to study the documents, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and all the documents that govern our lives. We have to understand society, have to get an education, and have to work hard and pay back that obligation. And second, we advise young people in particular to avoid contemporary slavery. By that we mean drugs, alcohol, and all those other things. And we don't advocate that from a religious perspective, but just from a practical perspective, that you only have so many synapses. And when you are youthful, you don't need those distractions, because today's world is so competitive. And if you don't want to produce it, others will produce it. If you want to be part of the mainstream, you have to move forward, and you have to use all the time that you have to move ahead. And we tell them, if you want to get high, wait till you're 95 years old, and then in their parlance, get yourself a blunt and a 40, and blow your brains out.
Fred and I always want people to know is that the story of slavery is an American story. See, people always want to make it just a black history story, but it's not. It's an American story, and we build bridges while we're out there, because we're with audiences that are of all races, creeds, colors, and religions and everything. And we really feel that we have an obligation to actually let people understand that it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're black, whether you're white. We want you to understand that this is a pain that we have to face. If we don't put it on the table, we're never going to understand each other. There are things that happen to white people that they're suffering from. There's many things, the degrading, ugly things that happen to African Americans that young people don't always understand. But in order for us to get the laws of karma and God to bless America the way it really should be blessed, then we have to put this thing on the table and look at it. And we like to heal. We go to America, Africa. We want to heal the wounds between African Americans and black Africans. But just build bridges. That's
Wow.
Wow, liberated woman. Right on, sister.
Oh yeah, she's very forceful and dynamic. And a fantastic singer. She sings a cappella. I like her to sing in that form because I think that accompaniment gets in the way, but she can sing however she needs to.
I'm just so impressed. I mean, the genes that this man sent forward into the future have presented such wonderful people to our community to help us and guide us and enrich us with your talents. What properties, what pieces of ownership did Frederick Douglass pass on to you? You know there were properties in Washington, D.C. that he owned.
Rochester, New York.
Rochester, New York. But talk about some of these holdings.
Was there one in London?
Yeah. Well, see, there are different holdings. Some have been sold. There were a number of houses. Right here in Baltimore, he actually built 5 properties on Dallas Street, 516 to 524. And interestingly, he built that because of his concern for affordable housing. He was aware of the need for freed slaves and those who are already free blacks to have decent housing. So he built them on the site of the Strawberry Methodist Church, which he was involved in earlier in his life, and he was also concerned about the deterioration of the area. 320 A Street in Washington, that's under private ownership, but it's a facility that's used for a lot of Douglas-related events. And then the National Historic Site is part of the National Park Service. There's also a property in Highland Beach, which is also a museum. So many of the properties have, become landmarks, historic sites, and I think that's good. In Washington we have many residences that have become historic sites. In terms of some of my own treasures, I treasure the books that I have and some very unique photographs and my own genes and what is
that's right.
What is in
balance.
but also I just having the name, I was blessed with the name, and again, some say the resemblance, and to me that's a gift because it allows me to be in situations where I can communicate things that I think are very important to contemporary youth. I mean, there's so many negative images. The average person is subjected to 500 to 1,000 messages a day, and less than 3% of those messages are interpersonal. From one person to another. They're mostly billboards, commercials, and so on and so forth. And then when you look at the music, some of the music that's presented, the television shows, it's interesting, I was reading in the paper that current lineup, prime time, at least 80% of it is crime-related drama. And so there's a need to present young minds with not only opportunities to see different messages, but to give them opportunities to express themselves. So what we try and do is involve them in a program which has 3 critical steps. And the first step is reading for comprehension. Second part is writing. In the writing part, it allows the young person to digest and formulate their own ideas. And then the third part of that is public speaking. So after they have read for comprehension, and digested and processed it, process the material, and then form their own ideas, then they can come out and speak publicly. One of the reasons I got involved is so many of my contemporaries tell me that the biggest problem that young people have coming into the workforce, be they white or black, is an inability to communicate the ideas effectively.
Right.
So it's possible now to go from elementary school all the way through high school while actually making a presentation. And you may be called upon to ask a question, answer a question, but you may not be put in a position where you have to make a speech. So we try and give young people opportunities to do those things and get involved in those kinds of activities. And that's very important because it prepares them to be productive at the end of the mainstream of the economic society. Are you filming?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, then I'll turn some of the things around. This is it's done by Thomas Stockert, who's affiliated with the Afro. He's done a number of charcoal and pen and ink sketches for me over the years that I've been able to use. Now, this is not actually a Frederick Douglass item, but this is actually an inventory from a farm in Maryland, from the state of Maryland, and it does mention ownership of 2 Negro slaves and their value. And I always take this with me because that is how we were listed as inventory. And so we were listed with china cabinet and furniture and stools and dishes and so forth and people. And so that's really how it's listed. I mean, we were inventory.
It says Negro woman by name of Hannah.
Right. Value
Washes
$508.
Right, $500.
$500.
It was one Caroline, valued $600.
Is that the one with the old man that was buried on there for like less than $20 or something? Wow.
No, that's another one, but the point is, I mean, it's, you know, it's mixed in with, well, I mean, it's
mixed in with the rest of the stuff.
It's very cold.
There's a gun, there's a saddle, and then there's a Negro woman.
It's just very cold.
It's property. Well, don't think we're not too far removed from that kind of writing and that kind of thinking. You know, I bought a home in Northeast Baltimore, and on the mortgage was Negroes are not allowed to live in this property unless you build a house on the back.
Yeah.
And I'm signing this mortgage.
Yeah, well, you know.
Oh, I had to remind him. Yes, I am.
Wow.
Then in 1965, this was the first stamp.
Wow.
This is what you call a 1290-100 sheet, and when I mentioned in terms of the overall value,
This
is the service, which is the trim, and people mistakenly, you know, they'll get it and they'll break up the sheet, or they might even have the whole sheet and tear this off, thinking it detracts from it, or it's easier to frame. But actually, that's part of the value of maintaining it. There was another stamp done in the 1990s, but this is one of my favorites. For binoculars, and but this was the dedication of the Frederick Douglass statue in Rochester, and if you look in the foreground, you'll see one of the early automobiles, and back in the corner is the statue. But this is from my collection.
So Frederick Douglass's legacy would be buy property and pass it on, and also use your skills and talents regardless of what the surrounding circumstances are. I'm going to ask you for some advice after we come back for young people. We'll be right back. Take a break.
All right. And while we're here, I just bought a couple of things to show you. Let me see. Okay. This is what I call, this is very, very rare photo. You won't see this anywhere else. This is what I call the original Afro. This is a photo of my great-great-grandpa. And this is one of the, well, this is the only photo where his hair was completely rounded into an actual Afro. Okay. But this is called a cabinet card. It's very rare. It's done by the Lydian Art Gallery, and this was given to people for display. People would exchange these, and so you would take it and you would display photos to your friends. What makes this especially rare, even down to the very ornate logo on the back of the photographer, who's a very serious photographer. This is a tremendous, and also, let's see what else did I bring. Well, Harper's Weekly. My great-great-grandfather was the first person of African descent to be featured on the cover of a national magazine. This was published in 1883. And many people ask, why did he never smile? Well, he was very concerned about the image of people of African descent in that time. And so he agreed to allow himself to be photographed and have his photograph distributed. But he would not smile because he did not want anything that could be distorted in any way. He felt that if he gave the slightest smile, someone would caption it or some way use it. But, you know, it's a stereotype. But that was why he did it, and he was photographed. He allowed himself, because of his awareness, you know, understand, if someone was aware enough to buy a printing press in 1845, and you understand he was on the cutting edge of technology, then he understood very much the image. So that is the image he consistently portrayed in all his photographs. He never smiled in the photograph.
So he didn't want people to, he didn't want his image to be that he was, what, smiling and enjoying?
He did not want anything.
Anything that would take away from
anything that could be stereotyped in any way.
Welcome back. This is wonderful. And you brought memorabilia with you.
Yes, I think it's very important for each and every person to understand their family and to look into their own personal records. So I have photographs, I have books, and obviously, you know, because I'm a descendant of Frederick Douglass, I mean, that has importance. But I feel that each and every person is important. And what I'm trying to do is get people to understand that they're valuable items in terms of financial value and in terms of historic value under their nose, which people tend to take for granted. And so when I work with young people, I tell them to go out and interview the oldest members of their family, get them on tape and ask them where they came from. But also look in the drawers and take out the photographs and ask them to identify who these people are. And go and find the old letters. And, you know, and when people die, don't just throw these things away, because they are treasures, they are historic documents. A letter can tell you where you came. And maybe a letter tells you that you own some property somewhere. It puts you in connection with family members. So we all have this history, and so as we get into genealogy, one of the things that you have to understand is there's a tremendous market now for black memorabilia. So you put something, you can take 10 photos and put it in a box and sell it at an estate sale for $1, and then someone else turns around and sells each of those photos for $100. But you know, when you look at those old photos that have the bubble top frames and the tin types and the cabinet cars and the CDVs or the car visites and all these things that are in homes, then you have to understand that there's some value. Before you let these things go, you have to understand and look at it, first of all, for your own family value, historical value, and then there are things of historic and financial value.
Yeah, because when I first started to research the family, I started with my mom's side, and there's this picture of my great-grandmother when she was a little girl, you know, standing, I guess it was a farm or something. I'm like, who is this?
Exactly.
You know?
Did you ask that with a camera in hand?
I should.
You have to go back and ask the same question with a camera in hand, because there's so many stories. One of the stories that's always fascinated me, if I could say something about my mother's side of the family. My mother, her family came from Texas, and it was a period of time where they sent out recruiters to go in the South to find blacks, particularly to do dangerous jobs. And my grandfather and his side came to work at a boiler factory. But anyway, they sent out this man, they said he was 6'10", jet black skin, and this was in the 1920s, and he was driving through the South in a black car, brand new car. And they sent out the word that you do not bother these people. They had identification because they're for a purpose. So he was able to drive throughout the South. No one bothered him, and he gave my grandfather a ticket to come north. And so he did that, worked in the boiler factory, and then he sent for my mother and her 6 siblings to come north. And so there, you know, these migration stories, I mean, migration to the Midwest, migration to different parts of the country because of employment and different reasons. And these are all the things that you have to learn about. And these are the things that you ask your family. And one of the things you find is, as you ask questions, people don't want to answer at first, and so you have to go back and develop a dialogue, develop a relationship until they trust you. And they'll open up and gradually give you little bits and pieces. But interestingly, you find that sometimes one word or one name will open up a whole vista of things. So it's so important. And so, yes, I do have some memorabilia, brought some photos, the double stamps and other things.
Yeah, I was just looking at one of them, like, oh, I didn't see that one before. It's like really interesting.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I do have is a Harper's. In 1883, he was the first person of African descent to be on the cover of a national publication. And then there were others. There was an edition where he was involved with Josiah Henson, who became known as Uncle Tom. And his whole history was twisted around because he was actually one of the greatest conductors on the Underground Railroad. And then in 1895, when he died, of course, it was a large story in Harper's Weekly.
Wow, yeah. I'm in awe.
Okay. But there are other things, I mean, Life and Times, the narrative of Frederick Douglass, and again, you know, cabinet cards, card de visite. He's been honored twice by Stamps in America. I have a 100-sheet. You know, when you get into collecting these things, for example, I have the full sheet, and you don't take it apart, and then you don't allow the children to come and peel off the edges, what is known as the service. Because as you take off that, everything you do to it detracts from the value.
So did one of your kids do that?
No, they learned at a very early age to have respect for all of these things.
Great.
What advice do you have for young people who are watching this program? What would you think your great grandfather would say?
Three great
grandfather would say.
My daughter's a great.
What advice would you give these 2005 young people?
I think he would say never give up. Never give up, despite any obstacles that you might overcome. You know, one of his favorite speeches was, "There's no struggle, there's no progress." And I could go through the whole thing, but the bottom line is power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will. And what that basically means is hard work. Hard work in his time, hard work in this day and age. I mean, this is what you have to do. You have to get in and apply yourself and make yourself valuable, make yourself a member of the mainstream of society, and find out how the system works. Learn all the documents that control your life, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, everything about voting, everything in the system that governs you, you need to know something about.
Yeah, definitely.
Reading for comprehension, writing, public speaking.
That's exactly right.
Pick up those skills and you can make your way in the world.
And one bit of advice he did give to a young man, what should he do throughout his life, and that was agitate, agitate, agitate. And by that he didn't just mean to go out and stir up things for trouble, but always in the midst. If you're an employee, you go in and you agitate, you stir up the mix and find out how you can shape that institution so you fit into it. And you have to constantly be agitating and pushing ahead.
Yeah.
2-year-olds do that.
Yeah.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
Well, we want to thank you, Frederick Douglass, for being a
so
part of this show. Don Douglas, thank you for letting me share limelight with you.
Yeah, and also, you know, this book, you know, people should get a...
Yeah, well, one thing I would say, the narrative is a masterpiece of American literature, and it's deceptive in its simplicity. I would recommend this. It's a book that can be read by 7th graders up through someone who's 95. And the reason I say it's deceptive in its simplicity is that this book has been analyzed over and over, and every device of rhetoric is employed in it. And so you read it and it tells you, it gives you a complete overview of slavery, his views on religion, and it also has biblical aspects, and it really tells you how people should treat each other.
Yeah.
But it's been analyzed and dissected in so many ways. And actually, I think that in terms of the 3 autobiographies he wrote, the other 2 being longer, this is the best in terms of the writing and the message it conveys on such an instantaneous and accessible basis.
I want to thank you again, Frederick Douglass IV, and Don Douglas. Again, thank you for letting me slide in here.
Thank you for coming. You know.
This is Spotlight on the National Great Blacks and Wax Museum. We just having a family reunion, y'all. Ain't nothing but a reunion. And we just want to thank you for being a part of our show. I'm John Carrington.
And I'm Dawn Douglas.
And this is Frederick Douglass IV. And we're thanking you for being a part of Spotlight on the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum. And remember, bye-bye, but y'all come back. Always doing something great on the Spotlight for the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum.
You all are fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
I think the other thing that I would tell you is that the family suffered a lot of discrimination. Rosetta was denied the opportunity to go to many of the schools that she wanted to, and one of the schools that she was ultimately allowed entry to in Rochester, she had to sit out in the hall while the other students were getting their lessons. Or my great-great-grandfather himself, even at the height of his fame when he was working with Lincoln, his confidant, and others, he was riding on a train in Lynn, Massachusetts, and they told him that he had to abandon his seat because the train was crowded and there was someone who needed, obviously a white person who needed the seat, and he refused to move. So they wrestled with him, first with 3 men, then 4 men, then 5 men, and they ultimately were able to pull the seat up. See, the chairs were nailed down, and they pulled the seat up with him in it and threw him off the train while it was rolling. So he is, and then the children, my great-grandfather, Frederick Jr., as well as Charles and Lewis, who he taught about printing, as they crawled around on the floors at the offices of the North Star, they could not get jobs as printers because of the unions. They would not let them into the unions. So I don't think people understand that even though he was able to gain entree into the middle class and was prosperous, even when he purchased his house in Cedar Hill, that involved breaking many covenants. There was great resistance to him owning that property. So those are the kinds of things that, the other thing that I would tell you that's not really dealt with in the history books is my great-great-grandmother's contributions. They tend to say that they were unevenly yoked, but Anna ran the Underground Railroad on a daily basis. She ran the household. She saved every penny that he sent home, and she made his shoes and sent him clothes and managed his schedule. So she made many contributions. And what people have to understand about the era, number one, is they don't say much about the achievements of women, but number two, there are many kinds of intelligence. You know, when you think about those who made the quilts and carried on the oral tradition, you know, you had to have a tremendous memory to understand all the complex directions, the codes you had to give as you went from the south to the north, the Underground Railroad. And if you didn't have the right information, you did not continue on. So Anna made tremendous contributions, and I think that history has been very unfair. And this lovely lady here is my wife. And when we do our reenactments, she portrays my great-great-grandmother. She is one of the nation's foremost a cappella vocalists. She doesn't need any accompaniment.